Stanley liked to explore the edges of everything, the farthest out edges of everything that was primal but controlled in civilization.
You could look at that film, come into the theater, and if you've ever seen any of Kubrick's other films, and you didn't know where you were, you would know it was a Kubrick film.
Well, I think the first thing that made Stanley Kubrick so special was he was a chameleon. He never made the same picture twice. Every single picture is a different genre, a different period, a different story, a different risk.
Well, I think he would choose projects that would pique interest. You know, the idea of James Mason with a 13-year-old in the 60s was very challenging to society.
Terry Sutherland gave Stanley Kubrick a copy of the novella, A Clockwork Orange, written by Anthony Burgess, when they were working together on the set of Dr. Strangelove.
He gave a copy to Kubrick and said, "You should read this, it was really great." And Kubrick read it and he just didn't get it.
The problem was the language of it, the Nadsat, the language that Burgess had developed for the book. Kubrick felt nobody's going to read this, nobody's going to watch this, nobody's going to understand this. So he rejected the idea of the project.
Kubrick was always very, very aware of where he stood in the pecking order. And he knew that people regarded him as being out there doing something innovative. And yet here were these kids kind of coming in and doing stuff that he'd never thought of. He had the idea, all right, let them make their youth film, then I'll come in and I'll make the great youth film.
Stanley Kubrick wanted to push the envelope. I don't think Stanley Kubrick was interested in the ordinary. I think the ordinary bored him.
Kubrick took over the project, A Clockwork Orange, after making 2001.
It had all the things that he liked. It had a great plot, it was short, it had a lot of action, and, as he said, it had one of the greatest characters that had ever been committed to fiction, almost a figure as evil and untouchable and engaging as Richard III.
He first of all decided that he did need a screenplay, and he got Burgess to write one, and he threw it out. He decided he could do better himself. He said, I've got the book, all I have to do is use the book.
So instead of carrying around a big screenplay, we carried around the book, which was a new way of making movies.
He would go on the set, he'd open the book, he'd say, okay, page 27, we're going to do that today. How would we do that? And then he'd sit down with the actors and the technicians and they would work out the way to do it.
Now, the irony of this, of course, is that when Kubrick actually made the film, he followed the novel extremely closely, using all that language, which he said would be rejected and nobody would understand.
Anthony Burgess, he invented this futuristic slang of the street kids of London, which he called Nadsat, which is more or less teen in Russian.
It consists of corrupted Russian, about 200 words of corrupted Russian, Cockney rhyming slang, and certain Gypsy and Romany colloquialisms.
In the film, Kubrick uses language, but he uses much less of it. And he always supports the language with a visual image. So the first shot of the film, which is this extraordinary close-up on Alex, the camera pulls away, and then you hear the voiceover of Alex, and he explains who he is. If you don't know what a droog is, you see these three guys sitting with him, so you can figure it out.
Stanley Kubrick would have seen Malcolm McDowell in Lindsay Anderson's If. Malcolm McDowell had the sort of the boyishness, the lovable, in spite of his badness, quality about him that Kubrick would have felt was key and that perhaps no other actor could have had.
The combination of velvet and violence, of snobbery and violence.
He's like a child. And I mean that in the nicest way, in the most positive way.
Malcolm does unbalanced very well. I mean, he does extreme personality disorder very well.
I think the only other person at the time who was ever considered for the part, although this was before Kubrick became involved, was Mick Jagger. At one point there was an idea that Jagger would play Alex and that the rest of the Rolling Stones would play the Droogs. Kubrick did say that if Malcolm McDowell hadn't been available, he probably wouldn't have made the movie.
In a way, McDowell never played another role after that. He played that role forever and ever because it fitted him so well.
When I went to meet Stanley and I said, what's the budget for the film? He said, well, it's going to be tight. And I go, well, how tight? He goes, well, here it is. And I looked at the front page and I was horrified. And I looked at Stanley and I said, is this for real? You're Stanley Kubrick. He goes, yeah, I know. He said, we've got to make it. He said, I've got to make a breakthrough and show him I can do a low-budget picture.
It's very interesting. When Kubrick made this film, he decided to shoot as much of it on location as he could. So he and his associates sat down with a pile of architectural magazines and began scouting locations.
He was imagining the future on a very small scale. So rather than build some kind of like futuristic apartment block, the idea was to use the worst possible apartment block that you could find in the 1960s in London. And there, you know, at that stage, there was a lot of them being thrown up.
He did not want to do a futuristic movie in a traditional science fiction way. He wanted something which was tomorrow, today, maybe near. I knew he wanted the movie to be timeless. And so we tried to give a look that was also possible to recreate. The street gangs in those days were all wearing clothes. They would put themselves together. They were not going to some costume house and do some extraordinary high-tech, futuristic things. The gangs of that day and the gangs of today, they're very inventive, but they do it with ordinary things.
And I said, you know, this is so anti-government. You know, Stanley, you're an American, but for me as a Brit, if you put a bowler hat on that guy, I said, that's really shoving it to the politicians. And he liked it.
Part of the whole thing was also to do something that we actually thought these guys would do to themselves, because it was almost like tribal decoration, because they were, indeed, a tribe. And I had some fake eyelashes, because this is the early 70s. I mean, they were probably mine, you know, in the box. And I suddenly thought, this could be the thing, you know. Perhaps just try an eyelash. We called Stanley, and he came over and he said, that's it. I mean, and it was it. It was just the right idea, the right time, and it was very simple, but it just had everything we were all looking for. If he thought somebody had a valid opinion about anything, even if it wasn't their department, you know, their area, he'd be interested in it. If there was a guy sweeping the floor who had something to say about the quality of, I don't know, something else, you know, Stanley would want to hear him.
And he would say to me also, Bernie, when you get the scripts out, give it to the guy on the door. I go, really? You mean the doorman? He goes, yeah. He goes, if anybody comes up with one idea that's great, I want to hear it.
He had no doubt about who was in control. He didn't feel threatened. You never knew when somebody was going to come up with a good idea, so he listened to everybody.
That was why he's such a great director. I mean, he was just a big sponge, you know, all the information would just come in and he'd sort of work it all out.
Kubrick, I would say, gives a new definition to the word controlling.
From the writing, through the casting, to the shooting, to the editing, to the use of music. I mean, he's so profoundly involved in every aspect of the film.
He was the producer, the director, the writer, the cameraman, the sound man, the designer. I mean, he was in everyone's department. So we have this one-man band on the set.
He just did everything in the movie business better than anybody else.
Kubrick had a unique relationship with Warner Brothers. The respect in which he was held was staggering.
We would do what I wanted to do, and I wanted to do what Stanley told me to do.
Stanley was a perfectionist. He was the one true 1,000% perfectionist that I ever worked with.
We would always spend a lot of time with the lighting, which is the one thing I really loved that Stanley always did, was take a lot of time setting the scene.
Stanley would spend a lot of time rehearsing. I mean, you could go to work at 6 in the morning and not roll that camera till 2 in the afternoon. But then he'd want to shoot till midnight. And he did.
You just took it. If you didn't want long days, then you didn't work for Stanley Kubrick.
I never saw my children for ages. I mean, they would be in bed when I left, and they would be in bed when I come home.
He just wants to keep, what if? What if? Is there more? Have you tried everything? Have we really looked? Let's go and look again. I mean, it's constant. Don't resist it, because you're going to have a miserable life.
There was no relief. There was no thing saying, well, let's have a night off easy, or let's go out for a beer and chat about the film. It was bang, bang, bang.
Malcolm was getting tired. Stanley would be like, what's wrong with this guy? You know, we're out all day, and these actors go to their dressing rooms, and we have to stay out in the cold and the rain, and we have to be hardy, and these actors, you know.
People do get knocked around on Kubrick movies. You know, it's part of the game. He was very attracted to the idea of making the aversion therapy to look realistic. And to this end, he decided to get these clips that hold open the eyes, metal clips.
So poor Malcolm is sitting there with a straitjacket on, with these clips holding his eyes wide open. Now, you just stand yourself like that. See how long you can stand it for. Well, 30 takes later, and your eyes are still clipped, and you've got these burp-bob, burp-bob, to keep them moist. So, at one point, Malcolm couldn't take it any longer. And he just panicked, screamed, or was angry. I don't know what it was. He just wrenched his arms to try and get out of the straitjacket. And in doing so, he hit one of the clips, and that scratched his cornea. And because he was in hell, he was in pain. I was in just so much pain. And that was the end of that scene.
Another one was the scene where he's taken by his old friends and brutalised, and they dump him headfirst into a trough of water for pigs.
And I was watching this scene, I went, is this real? Because it goes on forever and ever. And it was freezing cold. I mean, England's not like California. It's freezing cold. And he's laying on clay ground, which is soaking wet, freezing cold, with a skimpy outfit on.
Kubrick had the water made up by colouring it with meat extract. And Malcolm complained, you know, that after 27 takes of being dunked in this terrible cold soup, you know, that he was utterly revolted by the smell of this thing forever.
Hats off to Malcolm. He was in every scene. I mean, he did well.
Though there is not a lot of blood and vivid, explicit savagery, the idea of a group of thugs breaking into the home of an elderly couple and beating the shit out of them is one of the most disturbing things you can put on film. The idea that your own home is not a safe haven is much more disturbing than if you would see someone being stabbed with a knife or shot with a gun, which you now see every night on television in profusion. You know, all of the television shows have become way more graphically violent than Clockwork Orange was. Yet why are they not as disturbing? Is because Clockwork Orange goes to the deepest fears of human beings, that they're not safe in their own homes, no matter what, that the law can't protect them.
You know, Stanley had a way of looking at violence, as he had a way of looking at sex, too. And he, you know, in a certain way, he wasn't pulling punches, he was pushing punches. I mean, he waded straight into sex and he waded straight into violence. But it managed to be stylized. It managed to be not like walking in a room and discovering two people beating the hell out of each other or two people having sex. It wasn't like that.
It's interesting because in Clockwork Orange, which a lot of people consider to be a very violent film, I mean, most of the violence is very stylized. The one time when he actually kills the woman, you actually cut to an image of a painting from the woman's house, as opposed to actually seeing someone get killed.
Stylized violence is often easier on the senses. It's easier to watch without feeling quite so affected by it.
They'd shot for about 3 days and Kubrick wasn't happy with the sort of stylized destruction of the writer's house and the assault on him and his wife. He thought it was flat, it was static, it wasn't working.
He asked Malcolm McDowell in this early discussion, do you know any songs? And McDowell said, I only know one, it's Singing in the Rain. And Kubrick said, okay, wait a minute.
It's awesome to see that as a filmmaker, to see a beating being inflicted on people while Gene Kelly is singing Singin' in the Rain on the soundtrack. It messes up the circuitry of the viewer's mind.
It's one of those things which, having seen Clockwork Orange, you can never see Gene Kelly singing in the Rain again quite the same way. It affects your perception of that.
There are a lot of legends about the release of Clockwork Orange. There's a lot of legends about the release of all Kubrick's movies, I suppose. When it came out, it was fairly widely disparaged as being extremely unpleasant.
Malcolm McDowell's performance is a tour de force. And critics of the film, those who dislike the film, very much dislike the fact that his performance is so powerful, because it is engaging, because it does draw in viewers and allow them, maybe despite themselves, despite their own natures, despite their own sense of what's fair or what's moral, they are rooting for him.
He's a bad kid. I mean, he does some pretty horrible things. And yeah, we're having fun watching him do it.
Kubrick had a couple of bad experiences with, first of all, with screenings of the film, with people misunderstanding or people enjoying the violence of it. They felt that it was sort of giving them a rush.
And it was seen as being responsible for youth crimes at the time. Every youth crime was blamed on the film of Clockwork Orange.
Teenagers, after the film came out, started telling judges, I was influenced by Clockwork Orange, that's why I did it, sir.
A Clockwork Orange made violent youth culture attractive for many young people around the world. I don't think he set out to incite violence, but I know that the film did.
There were several incidents in the UK, incidents of ultra-violence.
I'm quite sure that Stanley was terribly, terribly, terribly hurt by the reaction to Clockwork Orange and felt that it was completely misunderstood.
That got too close to home for him when they started blaming him on Clockwork Orange for violence in the country.
You have to say that Kubrick could not have seen that coming, but once it did come, he recognized it.
Kubrick then, quietly and not telling anybody, withdrew the film.
He just felt that he didn't want to bear the burden of responsibility for violent crime.
And that's why Stanley pulled the movie 2 years after it came out. And it was never shown in England for probably 25 years.
It's the same thing when you have somebody that commits a murder and it's shown on the news, and there's somebody out there that wants to copy that same crime and do it. And they get the ideas from movies, they get them from television, they get them from the news, then they get them from people's actions.
We all have a responsibility in the sense that what we do is capable of affecting the way people think. It's propaganda. Finally, what it is.
We all teach. We all set examples. People who make movies or are in the media have a loudspeaker.
Some people look at that film and see a great, powerful essay on violence. Other people, possibly even more receptive to motion picture imagery and thought, viewed it as a blueprint for their own lives.
You don't have to be a genius to watch the boys in Clockwork Orange walking down the riverbank in slow motion and mentally cut between that and Reservoir Dogs as the black-suited men walk in slow motion down the street. From Kurosawa to Magnificent Seven, almost the sense of the mythical group of men moving through a landscape which is barren and somehow unbelievably sexy.
To me, it's actually very prophetic of punk, of the things that in the mid-'70s punk would be feeding off, which was the notion of anarchy, working-class violence. And also just the sheer landscape of the film, which is that very interesting futuristic, kind of stylish, but it's also a concrete tower block.
He had been told that he had a brain tumor that couldn't be operated on. And he sat down and wrote and wrote and wrote. And he wrote, I think, about 5 books, or the drafts of 5 books, in a year. One of which was A Clockwork Orange. And it has that tremendous sense of momentum that it was written in one go.
I didn't see it when I was growing up. I saw it a hell of a lot later on. But I remember kind of wanting to see it because I wasn't allowed to see it. There was like things on TV and you couldn't see them, but there was a kind of a mystery about it. It was like this banned film that you couldn't see, and it's like, you know, someone's got a copy of it and you go to someone's house and you watch it on video and it's like, oh wow, have you got a Clockwork Orange? You can go see it.
It wasn't until about 2 years ago that I watched it and I saw it on video, and I've still never seen it projected actually. And I just marveled at the number of times I had seen things from it stolen.
What struck me looking at this film is that this film is so radical. This film is truly disturbing, truly extreme. I can't believe a studio made this film. But I guess at the time, the 70s were so different, and in a way it reminded me that the 70s were a more liberal time.
We had to cut the devils. It really was way over the top. And then, of course, the month before we saw Clockwork Orange, we had In Straw Dogs, which again was a film that caused tremendous comment in the press. We did have Kubrick's track record to go back on, and we knew we were looking at a major film. And whatever one may think about board censorship, we normally do not like cutting films of great merit.
It's well known that a famous director through the 60s, John Trevelyan, used quite frequently to not just engage in dialogue with directors, but used to vet the scripts in advance. And indeed, the script for Clockwork Orange was seen before the film was seen. Now, it's some time since that kind of prior involvement in a movie or a video or anything that comes through these doors has been our habit. We're in the business of dealing with the work as it arrives.
The contentious points were all in the first half of the film, starting with the kicking of the tramp by the droogs. Really, the discussion wasn't all that long. No, we decided that putting it all together, it worked as a film, and therefore the earlier violence was justified, and it was passed without cuts.
When the film came out, Burgess went on air a lot, on television a lot, as it were, instead of Kubrick as a spokesman, and defended the film, while privately having a lot of reservations about it.
If he was truly worried about the film's effect or provoking violence against him, you'd have thought that he might have withdrawn it everywhere. But, I bought a video. You couldn't buy a videotape of Clockwork Orange in this country. I bought one in New York. So I was able to see the film. So the censorship that existed in Britain over Clockwork Orange seems to me to be deeply curious, and I'm not entirely convinced of that explanation.
If you ask me, am I aware of a director withdrawing a film and never allowing any version of the film to be shown in the United Kingdom? And particularly, is there an example of somebody doing that in the United Kingdom, but happily allowing it to be shown all over the world, all the time, for the best part of 30 years? I think it's unique.
In a novel, of course, first-person narration can be hugely unreliable and can lead you in all sorts of wrong directions, and writers exploit this all the time. But in cinema, when you hear that voice over the images, I think it has one effect. It becomes intimate. It becomes confessional. The audience is, in effect, on the side of the narrator.
The narration is a funny device because it just pulls the audience in. It makes them part of it. It makes them complicit. He's talking to you. You're his friend, So it's a way of kind of screwing with the audience a bit. You're sort of messing with them a little bit because you're making them intimate with this terrible person.
He's incredibly careful about the pacing of the voiceover. And when it came to, speaking purely personally here, when it came to doing my film, which also starts with voiceover, and he's a lesson in how to use it, because it's almost the best piece of acting that Malcolm McDowell does in the entire movie is with his voice, because it's very hypnotic very quickly.
I was a great admirer of his performance in If, and I wasn't really aware of Burgess particularly, or even Kubrick then. I think I was more drawn to see. I thought Malcolm McDowell was a really charismatic actor.
I'd just come off If with Lindsay Anderson, and I was terrified in a way because I wasn't sure how far I could go, and asking Lindsay and talking to Lindsay about this. And Lindsay would say, "Oh, Malcolm, you'll be fine. You always worry about stuff." Yes, I know, of course I'm neurotic about it, but look, would you mind just looking at the script? And he said, "Oh, all right, of course, I'll read it." And he did. He said, "I really don't understand much about this kind of stuff. I don't know how he's going to do it. It's extraordinary, really." He said, "But Malcolm, there is a scene in If where you come in into the gymnasium to be beaten by the whips.
And that close-up is how you play Alex.
And the weird thing about Alex is that he is a heroic figure because he seems to exist alone in a landscape devoid of other people. And somehow, even though he is Mephistophelian or whatever you want to call it, you somehow root for him also. And that's very skillful.
Alex is a bit of a charmer. I mean, he lives life to the full. You know, he enjoys what he does. Now, what he does you may not agree with, but at least he enjoys it. He doesn't go around like, he's out there robbing and having fun, you know.
I distinctly remember how long he holds the shot of the boys in the car. And it just goes on. And it goes past a certain point where it is logical and meaningful and makes any sense. And at that point, it makes total sense. Do you know what I mean? It enters your subconscious in some profound level, and it is very, very odd. You can't rid yourself of images in the movie.
He came over to me and said, Mal, can you dance? I think we were fooling around, Warren and I, you know, with these wonderful boots on, marine boots. And he said, you know, he just said, and I said, yeah, sure, why not? And I had the cane, and I started, I'm singing in the rain.
You definitely feel the presence of Stanley Kubrick there. He's kind of there. You really feel the puppet master. And boy, was that guy a puppet master. The violence is so unreal and so over the top that it loses its kind of authenticity, perhaps, and is not very shocking because it's kind of stretched.
Kubrick read the American version of Clockwork Orange, and the final chapter was omitted. And in the English edition, the final chapter is about Alex deciding voluntarily to abandon evil, to put away his toys, as he puts it, and to become a good citizen. And for Burgess, that's the point of the novel, that we have free will, and it is a morality tale about free will.
To Burgess, you know, this was part of the integrity of the novel. He believed that violence is something that everybody goes through as a teenager, or young men anyway go through, but grow out of. And he felt that Kubrick didn't show the growing out of bit, the adult bit. And Alex becomes an adult at the end and discards the past, and we don't see that in the movie, and that Burgess couldn't forgive Kubrick for.
When Alex is effectively lobotomized, becomes a Clockwork Orange, we are meant to condemn the state in the same way as we would condemn Alex for being a thug at the beginning of the movie. But Burgess's intent was different. I think he wanted to show how someone can become good voluntarily by an exercise of his own free will.
There were allegations that it had invited or stimulated some yob gangs to behave in an imitative way. What we don't know at this distance is how true that was. I mean, as a regulator over a very long period of time, one thing I have learned is that it's not uncommon for somebody who finds himself in the dock to say, well, Gov, it's not my fault. I saw this movie or I saw this television program, and I was led to it by what I saw. And it's quite possible that there was an element of that, particularly with Clockwork Orange.
This attempt to blame art for human evil founders very quickly. The Bible has inspired more acts of violence than any one single piece of literature, yet it's still revered and widely read. You know, it's a preposterous argument, it seems to me.
We all know Catcher in the Rye is the assassin's favorite paperback. Does that mean it should be banned in schools? In some schools it is.
Despite all the claims of sociologists that there are abundant studies proving a direct correlation of represented violence to violence enacted, I think that it's minuscule compared to the overwhelming numbers of people, millions upon millions of people who see any given violent movie, that the seeds for violent behavior have been sown long before the individual film.
Taxi Driver. Who would have thought? It's a great movie. Everyone agrees. It's one of the most important movies of the last 50 years. I don't think that Martin Scorsese thought that somebody watching that movie would go out and try and shoot the president. That wasn't his intention. And you would think that no sane or intelligent person watching the film would go out and try and shoot the president. But there was an insane person who did see it.